Welcome to the Health Edge, translating the science of self-care. I am Mark Pettis with my friend and colleague, John Bagnulo. John, good morning, my friend.
Hey, good morning, Mark. It's great to see you.
Great to see you, as always. We have what I think is a really interesting topic to share with our listeners that at first blush might seem a bit geeky, a bit esoteric, if you will. And we're going to be looking at the relationship between polyphenols in the foods that we consume, this huge, amazing, very bioactive, non-nutritive family of molecules and how they influence human health from top to bottom. And more specifically, looking at ellagic acid, a polyphenol that's in many pigmented fruits, and we'll look at all of that. And in particular, looking at the relationship between polyphenols, ellagic acid, and the microbiome, how our gut then modifies these molecules into very bioactive downstream metabolites. And as we've discussed, it seems no matter where you're examining a particular nutritional scientific edge, that you will find some relationship between what's being consumed, how your unique ecosystem of organisms in the gut modify that, and then ultimately how those byproducts have an array of biologic output. Which might accelerate one's health promotion and disease risk mitigation, or could go the other way, right? Depending on the quality of what you're eating and the quality of that biome. And so I love this topic, John. You brought this to my attention, and I think we have some exciting and actionable news to use that we can share with our listeners and viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. This just broader topic of polyphenols and kind of the interaction they have with our physiology, our endocrine system. It's really complex. But I think this molecule, which is a derivative of ellagic acid, is a great example or model of how many different inputs, like a polyphenol can have into the system, all the different things that affect its bioavailability. We have this idea that we eat something and it gets absorbed and it goes to work, but of course there are a lot of different rate limiting factors to that. But ellagic acid is something I think people have heard about that are into nutrition and are into polyphenols and plant-based nutrition. I mean, there's a lot of different demographics, so to speak, of people who would be familiar with ellagic acid. But what I think people fail to understand is really how that has to be metabolized, Mark, by gut bacteria to work in an ideal fashion for us. Not to say that's harmful. It still has some benefits, even if it's not metabolized into this urolithin A that we're going to talk about. But it's one of those things where, you got to have, to your point, you got to have the ecosystem for that molecule to really serve us to its full capacity. But ellagic acid, it's a polyphenol, and polyphenols, just by the word alone, many phenols, phenolic rings. And so all of these under the broader topic of phytonutrients, right? Something that's found in a plant that isn't a vitamin or a mineral. But it has very, very unique properties that can assist us in one way or another. Many polyphenols are anti-inflammatory. Most are antioxidants or have some antioxidant value. They can affect everything from our ability to form a clot, right? They can affect hemodynamics. But phytonutrients contain several different classes of molecules, and polyphenols is a really big one that ellagic acid is a prime example of. And most of these polyphenols are defense mechanisms for a plant. In the case of ellagic acid, it has antifungal properties, which makes a lot of sense when you see where it's found. It's found on raspberries, which are very susceptible to mold and fungus. It's found in walnuts. It's found in pomegranates. Those are the three richest sources, with raspberries, I believe, being, a close second to pomegranates, depending on the cultivar, raspberries, et cetera. But pomegranates, raspberries, blackberries, walnuts all have significant levels of this ellagic acid, which has 3 or 4 rings of these phenol rings, and because it has that ring structure, like all polyphenols, they're great at donating electrons to serve as an antioxidant. So again, I don't want to get to your quote here, too geeky, which is easy to do with this, but chemically, polyphenols are potent antioxidants because they're just so good at neutralizing free radicals by being able to donate that electron. So, ellagic acid is something that the scientific research community has known about for over 30 years. But only in the last decade or so have researchers connected it to this metabolite where gut bacteria converted into this other substance, urolithin A. And urolithin A, boy, you could argue that, much like other molecules, resveratrol, and the list goes on and on. Boy, it looks like the fountain of youth, especially for skeletal muscle, right, and for neurological health. So it's a really remarkable molecule, this urolithin A. Boy, it seems to be one of the best things you could offer to an aging mitochondria, either to stimulate new mitochondrial growth, to help us clear out senescent organelles that aren't working very well for us, but are just taking up space. But that urolithin A, it has to be converted from ellagic acid, and that takes the right gut bacteria. So it's a complicated story. It shouldn't take away our interest in eating ellagic acid, but we need to understand that you may need like long-term consumption of it to build up the gut microbes that you can ultimately use to form urolithin A. So just an awesome topic. I think so many disciplines come into this one.
Yeah, it's a great high-level overview, John, and I love this theme, this recurring theme in biology, is the relationship between plants and other species, and these families of molecules that for the plants serve as a defense that when consumed by humans will exert defensive mechanisms. There seems to be remarkable integration and synergy between the plant life and the non-plant life, and only nature can orchestrate the alchemy that we're talking about here, which is just so. This stuff just brings me to my knees, John. Grateful for even to be aware that these things in nature are happening, and they're happening all the time, and they're happening all around us and in our lives. And so it's nice to even have awareness of that, because it can, for anyone who it can be hard in the hubbub of day-to-day lives, right? We get caught up in our worlds, in our little universes, and this kind of expands consciousness. So I love that. And I'm going to share my screen, John. We've got a few slides that I think will begin to resonate based on your great introduction. And I will be uploading any article that we reference, John, on our website, thehealthedgepodcast.com, for those that want to look at these references in more detail. Many of the graphics that I'll be sharing come from this is a 2024 article looking at this relationship that you set the stage for, John, between foods containing ellagic acid, the gut microbiome, and ultimately the metabolic output of urolithin, this remarkable downstream metabolite that has a lot of interest, as you pointed out, John, in the aging and longevity research as a senolytic agent, something that will take an aging cell and remove that cell, because an aging cell that's not dying as it ordinarily might be programmed to do can then become a source of inflammation. And I think all of our listeners and viewers know that any chronic inflammatory source is a gateway to accelerated aging and decreased health span, increased morbidity, and diminished quality of life. So what we're talking about here is a molecule that explicitly enhances the ability to recognize an aging cell, aging organelles, as you point out, John, like mitochondria, and can help regenerate and create new organisms. So it helps us to remember that our cells and organelles are always turning over. Who you see in the mirror on any given day will be a little bit different in a few weeks as new cells are formed, old cells are taken out and recirculated, and urolithin A has emerged as a key and central player in the ability for that recycling, for that regeneration, and for that renewal. And so this is just a good paper that illustrates that. And this kind of, I'll just summarize this briefly, John, and then have you weigh in. But as you talked about, and we'll look at foods that you touched on, some big ones: walnuts, pomegranates, raspberries. It's funny, John. These are the three that the article emphasizes as highest in ellagic acid, just affirming what you just said. And how we eat these things, we enjoy them. You know, they're sumptuous, they're delicious, they're colorful, and then we leave it to this ecosystem to take over. We kind of hand it off, and here we see that the gut will take ellagic acid and produce these urolithin families of molecules, these polyphenols. You see these rings that you refer to, John. A literal, you start with 4, they're removing a ring, and urolithin A in particular appears to be the most active of this family of urolithin metabolites. And this is just really a very high level of how it helps us metabolize things in the liver, this biotransformation of molecules, very important for detoxification, very important for epigenetics, and how ultimately the metabolic effects are to reduce inflammation, enhance brain health. You pointed out, John, about the importance of protein muscle synthesis, key, and as we've talked about in prior podcasts with respect to aging, longevity, strength, metabolic health. And so, you get these sort of global effects. So you start from plant to the biome, to the output, to these very broad and diverse effects on human biology. This is a kind of a good summary slide, John.
Oh, it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal, Mark. Again, I'm so appreciative that you put this where our listeners can really see such a really complex but amazing system or series of events here. We just start, if I go back, maybe 30 or 40 years, researchers, saw a clear link in some individuals, some populations between pomegranate consumption and a reduction in all of the classic biomarkers for heart disease. Again, and one of the theories at that time was that pomegranates contain a substance that increase the HDL's cholesterol scavenging properties. And we know that urolithin A is somewhat tied to that, but I think it was just a real, very limited understanding at that time of all the other benefits that pomegranates, and in this case, urolithin A, offer with respect to cardiovascular health. You can see in this slide, it's anti-inflammatory with respect to the actions that it has on adipose tissue. I'm sure our listeners are aware that adipose tissue can be a very
on me, John. I'm going to just give you a
very significant source of chronic inflammation,
reconnected,
and turning down some of those cytokines that are produced by higher levels
This
of
slide does
body fat or
summarize
adipose
a
tissue is
lot of what John
very,
and
very
I have
protective.
been talking
And
about.
then with respect to the brain, oxidative stress is one of the primary mechanisms that undermines neurological health or brain health. And urolithin A has very strong antioxidative or antioxidant effects, especially with respect to the neurons. And then, we talked a little bit about muscle health, but look, muscles are really
And I
a
think
highly
John is
ordered
still
type of
trying to get
cell.
back on here.
You look at the myofibril alignment, you look at all the things that have to happen for, calcium release and then sequestering
John,
it to
can you
get
hear me, bud?
relaxation. There's just a lot there, but it's highly ordered. And so muscle cells need a massive amount of energy to maintain that high
While
level
we're
of
waiting
order.
for John,
And that
I want
energy
to
is largely
just
dependent
point
on
out
mitochondrial
in
health.
advancing the next
Mitochondria
slide
produce,
here
95 to
that,
98% of the energy that a
again,
muscle cell
many
uses or needs at any given
sources of
time. And the
polyphenols
mitochondria
in
are
the
often the weak
plant-based
link
nutritional
in the aging
world,
muscle. And so urolithin
in
A is very,
particular
very protective
pigmented
against
fruits and vegetables,
damage to mitochondria and,
spices
as
like
you mentioned out
curcumin,
already, promote favorable
nuts,
changes
coffee,
within the
tea, dark
mitochondrial
chocolate,
population. So, great stuff
cereal
on so many
grains, whole
different
grains,
fronts,
legumes.
physiological
These are
fronts in the body.
very rich
And I
sources
just think,
of
when you take a look at
polyphenols
it, the
that
question becomes,
can,
okay, is this
again,
something that if
in the
we're
gut, be
dependent upon gut
metabolized to
bacteria,
produce these
is this something
active
that we can rely upon?
metabolites in
Just
addition
eating, let's
to
say, a bowl of
urolithin A.
raspberries
You
every
see
day?
these
Or
short
do
chain
we have a
fatty
glass of
acids
pomegranate
that John and
juice?
I
Should
have
we look
talked
at this more
about, like butyrate,
pharmacologically and consider taking a
which is
urolithin A
really
supplement? I don't think
important
we have all
to
the
the
answers
gut.
to that, but the one thing,
And this
Mark,
is
that other
just another
papers would support that
family
this one
of
touches on,
polyphenols,
estimates range from like
and a
20 to
bit more
40% of
of a
humans
specific breakdown
have the
of the
ability to
foods
convert
that
ellagic
one
acid,
can
20%
find them
being,
in. And
probably
again, these
typical of most
are
papers, and then
categories
40%
that I
being
think will be
one of
familiar
the
to
more
many:
kind of liberal
flavonoids, phenolic
estimates. But
acid,
somewhere between 20 to
tannins,
40% of
still
humans
beans,
have the
and
ability to
their
convert the
sources.
ellagic acid from those
And let me just
pomegranates
see
or
if
from the raspberries that they eat to urolithin A. The others, it might take a while for them to get the
John has
gut
gotten back
bacteria
on yet.
necessary to be able to do that. And then you wonder how you can help those people. Is it continuing to eat those sources of ellagic acid and slowly building up gut bacteria? Are there probiotics? And I think there's a lot of unknown
Yeah, I
with
think he's
respect
having
to
trouble on his
what
end.
we
I
can do to
apologize for
enhance
that.
bioavailability,
I
or in this
will
case,
just continue to
biotransformation
share
of
what
ellagic
we have
acid
here.
to urolithin A. A lot of different theories out there, but there is some evidence that if you
Though the
continue to
discussion is
eat
not
ellagic
as rich
acid, that those
without John,
populations of gut
it
bacteria that are
certainly
needed will slowly
don't want
increase
to
in some
create too
studies.
long of a
Some studies,
pause
they do get
here.
to a point where kind of
Polyphenols
that
have also
biotransformation can
been
take place.
studied in large populations with respect to most of the common chronic complex diseases of 21st century. And we know this is one of the reasons why plant-based foods epidemiologically have been shown to be so protective and health promoting. The beyond the nutrients, and most plant-based foods are nutrient dense. These polyphenols, these non-nutritive classes of molecules that protect the plants, can and have been shown to impact neurological disorders like Parkinson's, ALS. I would put Alzheimer's in that category. Can reduce cardiovascular disease risk. Very important for managing obesity and diabetes. Can reduce cancer risk, again, by enhancing this process of apoptosis, and which is programmed cell death. So those aging cells aren't hanging around too long, and reducing inflammation and insulin resistance are probably two of the most widely recognized metabolic effects that more than any can seem to enhance health, promote health span, quality of life. And there's a lot of interest in the longevity and aging research now with respect to these organisms. And I'm just going to check in with John again here.
Hey, Mark. Hey, Mark.
Well, sorry about that. I will go ahead and finish this. And the last slide that
Hey,
I
Mark, are
wanted
you
to
there?
share was, and again, this is a bit more mechanistic with respect to how ellagic acid and ultimately these metabolites, urolithin A, some of the mechanisms whereby they promote health and reduce disease risk. John, are you back?
I am, Mark. I'm sorry about that.
No worries,
Poor
brother.
service here.
No worries. I took the ball and just ran with it, John, knowing you'd be back eventually. And I was just sharing a few of the slides that we had reviewed earlier from, looking at the many different categories of polyphenols in various fruits, vegetables, nuts, coffee, tea, chocolate, dark chocolate, and looked a bit at the global benefits of these polyphenols with respect to disease, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative diseases, and it sort of brought me to this mechanistic slide that I was just beginning to review, John. So you come back at a good time, and so this, how would you sort of walk somebody through this, John? This is really sort of the mechanisms that lead to many of these broad and amazingly positive health attributes that we started out on.
Yeah. So, a few moments ago, a little earlier, I mentioned how ellagic acid, once it went through biotransformation by gut bacteria, how it produced urolithin A, and again, and I'm not sure if that came through to our listeners, but it might be 20, might be 40%, right, of humans have gut microbiomes that can support that biotransformation. But when it's not biotransformed by gut bacteria, ellagic acid has so many different ways of altering nutritional biochemistry, so to speak, or in this case, we could just say biochemical pathways in the body. Many of those are, you can see, from an endocrine perspective, you can see some of the hormones whose pathways are altered, right? I mean, obviously, people are concerned with IGF-1 when it comes to risk of cancer. There are so many enzymes that we broadly put in this category of kinases, such as AMPK, activated protein kinase A. You see HMG-CoA reductase. That's really the enzyme that governs cholesterol production. So that's how there is some of this relationship between ellagic acid and cholesterol levels, and even the types of cholesterol that are produced. There are receptors for ellagic acid in the body, which you and I always find just so amazing, right? It's like what you were speaking about earlier, how phenomenal it is to think that here's a molecule produced by plants that is in essence a defense mechanism for that plant, yet we have receptors for that molecule in the body. That's again, I just think that's astounding. And then to think that some of those receptors are going to control things like glucose uptake by a cell, so they're going to make us a little more insulin sensitive. In essence, you have all the different genetic expression pathways. You see the PPAR, which are these peroxisome proliferation activation receptors that govern a lot around which genes are going to be transcribed. You can see that NFKB, nuclear factor kappa B, which is a direct precursor to inflammation, is reduced. So biochemical pathways, when ellagic acid is introduced into those pathways, can alter them. And in this case, what we're showing here is everything's going really in a favorable direction towards, disease risk reduction. So multifaceted, to say the least. And I just, again, to be clear, this is with ellagic acid. That we're not talking about urolithin A, we're talking about the precursor to urolithin A. So what we're showing you here is that even if you're not one of the 20 to 40% of people that can convert it to urolithin A, there's still huge upside. And the one thing that, again, I just want to reiterate is that there is evidence that if you continue to eat ellagic acid rich foods, you feed the gut bacteria that need that polyphenol for optimal populations, and you will ultimately may develop the ability to convert it to urolithin A. So it's one of those things where, again, if you build it, they will come, I guess, is how we like to describe the changes in the microbiome.
Yeah, it's fascinating how positively reinforcing that cycle is, John. The more substrate one consumes, the more likely they are to facilitate changes in a biome that can then positively metabolize and break down that substance to then further enhance human health. What is there? Questions that are likely to come up, John,
Yeah.
are if you're one of the people, for example, who doesn't have the ecosystem to adequately metabolize ellagic acid, is there readily available? I say readily available because I think bringing up testing that is not easily accessible and very expensive is not something most people can really engage. To your knowledge, is there any testing readily available, John, that can look at this in a let's say a stool sample or a blood measurement? How can one tell if they're a converter or not?
Well, I first want to say I have absolutely no affiliation with the company Mitopure. I have zero affiliation with it, but they are responsible for at least 75% of the research and the published papers on urolithin A. That company does have a test kit. I'm sure the cost is significant, but they do have a test kit that can measure urolithin A blood levels. Which is amazing. And that would be, you would basically eat a diet rich in ellagic acid for a few days to a week or so. You do this little at-home test, and it tells you whether or not you have any urolithin A in your blood, which would be again, that's the surrogate marker for can you convert ellagic acid. So there is, the test is out there. Obviously proprietary. It's owned by this Mitopure. The thing that people could do if they wanted to do a broader kind of investigation on this was, it'd be very easy to look at the published papers on the gut microbes that are responsible for converting ellagic acid to urolithin A. There are some families of bacteria that are intricately involved in that you're dependent upon. And you could do a stool analysis, kind of a more broader spectrum stool analysis, and you can see if you had those families present. That would be kind of the way to circumnavigate doing something that was a test owned by a company that again produces urolithin A. So they have to some extent they have a stranglehold on the research and the ways that people can supplement. There are other companies that do sell urolithin A. Most of the protocols in research papers use somewhere between 500 to 1,000 milligrams of that per day as a supplement. And again, very effective for the people, for the people listening to this that want to understand what's been shown with urolithin A. It's been shown that when you're supplementing with it for, 2 to 3 weeks, and some studies have gone 2 to 3 months, that there are significant gains in strength in comparison to the control group. So it does appear to offer, especially when it comes to skeletal muscle health, development, strength gains, does appear to be very beneficial. So I no affiliation with any company here that manufactures urolithin A or Mitopure, anything like that. But to answer your question, Mark, I think the two ways you could go about that is you could, bite the bullet and pay the company that has developed the test. I don't know about the cost. Or the other thing is you could do a stool analysis to see, do you have the families of bacteria that have been identified as being kind of those rate limiting factors.
Yeah, that's helpful, John. And like so many aspects of measurement now, stool measurement, blood measurement, these are rapidly evolving
Yeah.
landscapes for testing, assessment that may or may not be ready for prime time. But I think for people who are really curious and maybe have the resources, it might be interesting to look at. I've looked at MitoPure and yeah, John and I have no we're not paid to do podcasts. We have no sponsorship by design. We've chosen not to go down that route. There's nothing wrong with going down that route. But I do think that it's important that anytime we're mentoring a company or a particular product, that we have no financial interest in making that statement. And MitoPure, I really admire the research they're doing, and I do think the urolithin A, the senolytic category is sort of a new emerging area of nutritional science and certainly aging and longevity science. And I think, in my opinion, so much of the innovation today really does come from those private sources. At the same time, one just wants to make sure that what's being published, particularly when sponsored by companies that are producing supplements that may be incredibly beneficial, that just be aware of those potential conflicts of interest. And so I think when I look at those studies, John, it is intriguing how protein, muscle protein synthesis and, recovery, many things that we talk about in terms of metabolic health as it relates to muscle mass, muscle protein synthesis, getting enough highly bioavailable and quality protein and amino acids like leucine and when you look at the epidemic of sarcopenia and poor metabolic health and functional decline, that it is exciting, I think, for both of us to see a mechanism independent of just getting more protein, getting more leucine, getting more resistance exercise, all of which are the holy grail that can independently also facilitate many of those same processes beyond the non-skeletal muscle health that we've touched on. And I do think it's worth coming back to this really important point that you made, John, as you came back on, that ellagic acid, independent of urolithin A as a metabolite, has many incredible health promoting properties. So it's just so important to recognize that a supplement, while it may be really targeted and beneficial for someone who doesn't convert, should not result in someone saying, I can't convert, therefore why eat any foods that have ellagic acid? Obviously, there are so many properties independent of urolithin A and independent of ellagic acid in those sources that will have tremendous health benefit. And so nature has a way of just packaging things. And so we come back to those same sort of principles from a self-care, from a nutritional science perspective that are just so important to reemphasize.
Yeah, 100%, Mark. I think it's really important to, just remind everybody that, the pharmacological approach, which is taking a supplement of something that has already been biotransformed and produced to be the end product, is very different than eating the food and allowing the body to benefit from all of those primary and intermediate metabolites. In the case of ellagic acid, and with every polyphenol, right? I mean, it's there are so many benefits to something that is much, much further upstream than just the urolithin A. And the other thing that's really important for our listeners to remember is that you can have excessive antioxidant intake, and this usually only occurs with supplement use. because we know that if you don't have at least mild to low levels of oxidative stress, then you start to lose the stimulus for the body to produce its own antioxidants, which are, far and away the endogenous antioxidants we produce for the mitochondria and for all assets of our physiology. That's critical. And there are now, I think there's a growing body of evidence that people can overconsume antioxidants and can really suffer because of it, which I find fascinating. Right? We used to call it like vitamin toxicosis. We didn't really understand all the mechanisms, but we know now that, antioxidants, when it comes from food, very difficult to get to that place of concern. But we do have to be a little more cautious when we start taking highly refined, really potent antioxidants or substances which have kind of been brought to that final metabolite, so to speak. And that, using this as an example, ellagic acid from your raspberries and your pomegranates isn't going to get you to any place of problem physiologically. But if you start taking highly refined and concentrated doses of some of those downstream metabolites of ellagic acid, we just don't know. We just don't know what the what the potential, the unwanted effects could be of that.
Absolutely. Another great sort of nutritional principle is that nature, these integrated systems are so refined, and these low-level stressors have become our survival driver, because they turn on these repair rejuvenation systems. And so to eliminate completely that signaling is to risk disrupting a system that requires some low levels of inflammation and oxidative stress, senescence, to achieve those outcomes. And so, it's hard not to be humbled by the level of precision. And I think as far as we've come, we're still largely in the dark about just how elegant, refined, these systems are. But this is a good example. This discussion, I think, is a good example of many of those principles, John. So the take-home message is, foods high in ellagic acid are, the many that we've reviewed are foods that will be high in polyphenols.
Yeah.
And understanding that nurturing the gut and allowing those sources to be fully realized as an orchestration, right, as an alchemy of biologic output is where the magic is occurring. And today, to a large extent, John, we kind of state the obvious, but when you begin to look at the mechanisms that drive our understanding, you realize just how elegant and sophisticated and humbling we are in our ability to navigate what's available to us and how best to use it. And so it really does come back to what our generations before us inherently knew, that those things growing around them and those that they are cultivating are colorful and healthy and sumptuous, and health will be the outcome of that relationship.
Yeah, it's an amazing symphony. Well said, Mark.
So we will apologize for the temporary glitch that we had, and we will update. I'll update to our website, John, our PowerPoint slides that we shared, some of the PDF articles that are open access that we're able to share. And there are some really good papers for people who want to take a deeper dive. And pleasure as always, John, to connect with you in your busy life and to share your wisdom.
Same here, Mark.
Kind of gets my dopamine and my oxytocin in the right place, as we take on a new day.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. It's always great to start the day with you, buddy.
You as well. Peace, bro.
Take care.